before I start to speak about today's topic, I have to make three distinctions because I have found out that people have great trouble in distinguishing the words objective, subjective, and the words material and formal. Sometimes I have to point out that anybody who is not subject to the Roman Pontiff and who is not in union with the Church cannot be such this tape or listen to the audio tapes. One of the reasons why we cannot positively state that this Pope is that this Pope is not Pope is because, first of all, we need proof. We do not have this proof. Some people quote the apostolic bull of Paul IV, Cum ex apostolato, against the present Pope, saying that Paul IV decreed that a heretic cannot become Pope. Yes, but the papal election is an act of administration, not a sacrament. It is not a theological procedure. Therefore, there cannot be an infallible pronouncement on it. It is an act of administration, just like all elections. When in a monastery an abbot is elected, this is a canonical election. The election of the Supreme Pontiff among the cardinals is a canonical election. And those rules can not only be changed, but were changed a couple of dozen times over in church history. Leo XIII changed the rules. Pius X changed the rules. Pius XI changed the rules again. Pius XII changed the rules again. Paul VI changed it, and the present Pope changed it again. And none of them has ever quoted Paul IV again on this. Now, the bull, Cum ex apostolato, is an infallible bull as far as the doctrinal statements are concerned. It cannot be infallible as far as an administrative rule is concerned, saying that if a cardinal was a heretic, even when he was a heretic and converted, he cannot be validly elected Pope. To be validly elected Pope, you need positive human law, a law of administration. And that every single Pope can change, much unlike the doctrinal laws, which no Pope can change, ever. If a Pope decides forever on a moral issue, his successor cannot change it. Impossible. He will put himself in schism with the Church. But a rule of administration and how it can be changed, and how. In the beginning, the people of Rome elected the Pope. Later on, it was the clergy of Rome. And very much later on, only 1,300 years after Christ died and resurrected and founded his church at Pentecost, cardinals were the only ones to elect the Pope. So if a future Pope says, I don't want cardinals to elect the Pope, but all of the bishops in the world, he's going to make a mess. But that doesn't make the election invalid, because it would be horrible. I don't want to think of it. But it doesn't make the election, duly procedures required and provided, it doesn't make it invalid, because it's an act of administration. And that's why I recommend the Sedevacantists to be a little more careful with their judgment. The Society of St. Pius X is not exactly composed of all idiots, and none of them nowadays considers the Apostolic See vacant. And the three priests, Father Sanborn, Kelly, and Secada, unfortunately, because they're otherwise very good theologians, unfortunately had to be kicked out of the Society of St. Pius X for insisting on the fact that we do not have a Pope. To me, this is a neurotic statement, too, because you put yourself in a dead end. Who's going to elect the next Pope? I'll leave the question to you. Now, we are in the topic already. I mentioned the Society of St. Pius X, and Father Trenchard pointed out to you that you will not be excommunicated if you use the services of the Society of St. Pius X. Why is this so? Now, I have to presume that you will see the tapes of my conference on Thursday, Fridays, and yesterday. I do not have the time to repeat everything I said there, so there will be a lot of references to my first, second, and third lecture. In my first lecture, I explained to you how the crisis came about. In my second lecture, I explained to you what is wrong with the new Mass. And yesterday, I explained to you what is wrong with Vatican II. And in near future, you will get a complete list of all the quotations of Vatican II, which are definitely unacceptable to a Catholic. And just reading those quotations, you will be able to see what I mean. You will, even though you're not learned theologians, you will be able to use my list to see and understand what I mean. I give you one example. We have that much of time. Lumen Gentium 16 says that the Muslims, together with us, adore one merciful God. This is blasphemy and heresy, because it might as well be that the individual Muslim tries to find the real one God. but the council says the Muslims, capital letter in Latin, Musulmani nobiscum adorant unum Deum. They do not adore one merciful God with us, but against us, because they deny the incarnation and they deny the Blessed Trinity, and they use words which I don't want to repeat here to describe what the idea of the Trinity. And Vatican II has the blasphemous audacity to speak about them and the Jews praying to the same God we do. This is a thoroughly and entirely Masonic concept that cannot be accepted by any Catholic. The Muslims are not only heretics, they're pagans. And they do not adore our God because they do not adore Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Anybody who says they adore the same God we do because they nobiscum, together with us, not along with us, as one smart aleck translated, together with us is nobiscum. If you say they adore one merciful God together with us, then you sin against the first commandment gravely. We adore Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and Son incarnated man. The Word has become flesh. You see, the situation is a disaster, and that's to say the least. So in 1970, French seminarians of the Séminaire Français in Rome were threatened with being kicked out of the seminary for the simple reason that they wanted to say the rosary and wear the cassock. So they did not accept that, of course, and they asked Archbishop Lefebvre, who at this time was contemplating to retire and live the rest of his life pensioned in Rome. They were asking Archbishop Lefebvre for help. Archbishop Lefebvre was not very convinced at first that he should do that, but however, they insisted, especially a certain Monsieur Tissier de Malaret, who is now Bishop Tissier de Malaret, insisted and kept insisting, and together with him, another French priest who is now at the moment the second general advisor to the Society of St. Pius X. So they found a house in Fribourg in Switzerland, and Bishop Henri Charrière of Fribourg, Lausanne, and Sion at the same time gave them an official church blessing to found the society, the priestly society of St. Pius X. And so it was a work of the church, legally, regularly founded by a diocesan bishop in Switzerland. And the society was canonically, therefore canonically means according to the regulations of the Code of Canon Law, canonically erected in 1970. And after a while, Archbishop Lefebvre found the house, which is still the French-speaking main seminary today in Écon, that's in the Rhone Valley in Switzerland, the French-speaking part. And it was about after 1.5 years that Rome found out that they are celebrating the Old Mass, and they are teaching all this old stuff with Vatican II wanted to do away with. So they sent in 3 investigators, Cardinal Garon, Cardinal Wright, and Cardinal Tabera, who, quote-unquote, investigated. Right there in the place, they all gave praise on the whole outfit and said, this is beautiful, wonderful, everything according to the canonical regulations. I wish we had that elsewhere. Back in Rome, they said the exact contrary, which is typical for conciliar methods. You lie, cheat, and swindle. When you read Vatican II and its footnotes, you will find out that they lied, cheat, and swindle. They, in one and the same sentence, footnote at the end, they quote the guy, a church father or somebody else, quote it in the footnote in the first half of the sentence, and then they say the contrary in the second half of the sentence, and put the footnote after the second half of the sentence, quoting, for example, in Gaudium et Spes 22:2, the church father Justinus, contrary to what Justinus said. This is the method of Vatican II and the Novus Ordo Church, the counterfeit church out there. They reported to Rome that this is not that the seminary in Écon was not according to the standards of Vatican II, etc., etc. You can very well imagine what they said. And so Rome said, we're going to shut down this thing. Archbishop Lefebvre, contrary to canon law, never even got a hearing, let alone a cause at the competent church tribunal. Never anything. You can read this in detail in one of the books available at the bookstands of the Society of St. Pius X. Archbishop Lefebvre was not even heard, which is against canon law. And then the official close down of the Society of St. Pius X, not by the Pope, but by the Secretary of State, was silently acknowledged by Pope Paul VI, and Archbishop Lefebvre, the person concerned, never had a chance to defend himself. So this is the methods of, as Father Trinchard pointed out, tyrants who do not, they use canon law when it serves their purposes. But they do not understand canon law, they do not understand divine law, they do not understand eternal law, and they do not understand the meaning of law itself, the purpose of law, justice. So the Society of St. Pius X went on all the same. Rome explicitly forbade Archbishop Lefebvre to ordain priests. However, in 1976, he did ordain priests against the explicit instruction of Rome, and so they suspended him ad divinis. That means he was further on, according to what Rome believed, further on he was not allowed to say Mass except privately, and he was not allowed to give the sacraments except in the case of emergency. And this is exactly what we are in. We are in a case of emergency. The Church provides jurisdiction. Read canon law. The new Code of Canon Law confirms what I say. I do not have to quote the old canon law to make my point. The new Code of Canon Law affirms in several canons the old law of emergency. Now, why are we in an emergency? Well, listen to my lecture 1, 2, and 3, and you will see we are definitely in an emergency with 99% of the hierarchy preaching heresy. You need Catholic priests. You do not want to go to confession to a priest who says, oh, come on, that's not a sin. What's the matter with you? Today's priests tell young people in the confessional it's all right to go to bed before you're married. Wonderful. This is not what you want when you go to confession. You want to hear the Catholic moral theology, also because otherwise the absolution is invalid. So here, some people, some conservatives, I'm not a conservative, I warn you. I'm just plain Catholic. So some conservatives are worried about the jurisdiction of the Society of St. Pius X. They are absolutely not worried about priests who explain away sins at the confessional, which makes absolution invalid. They're absolutely not concerned and worried about priests who give general absolution, which in 99.999 cases is invalid. I have so far known only one single case of general absolution having been valid after the Second World War. And that was on a plane that was threatened with a crash. And the priest got up, turned around, grabbed the microphone, and said, anybody who's a Catholic, do an act of contrition, ego vos absolvo peccatis vestris, and so on, gave general absolution. That's valid according to Pius XII. It's valid according even to the decrees of the present Pope. 99.9% of all general absolutions are not valid. Nobody's hooked up with that problem. The conservatives are always worried about the jurisdiction of St. Pius X. Well, I tell you, the Society of St. Pius X gets the jurisdiction for absolution out of canon law. Canon law says jurisdiction can be given either by the competent authority or by the Church itself. The Church itself gives the jurisdiction for absolution or for marriages, as a matter of fact, in certain cases. I'll give you one example. A priest on a ship has all faculties automatically. Sure, he's the only one who can be approached for confession. I mean, if you commit a mortal sin on a cruiser, and that's very easy with the temptations out there, you don't want to die, you don't want to go to hell in case you die the next day or the ship sinks. So you might want a priest to confess to. And this priest usually does not have the faculties of confession out there on the ship, because there's no bishop around who would give him the faculty. So the Church gives the faculties. And in any case of emergency, not just in the case of danger of death. See, canon law speaks about the danger of death, but it speaks about emergencies. It does not exclude other emergencies, because canon law is never exclusive without explicitly saying so. That's one of the first canons in the book. So the Society of St. Pius X has jurisdiction simply for the fact that there are no other Catholic priests around, or not enough. You have to. You're not, as a Catholic, you are not under the obligation to take a plane into another city in this country to be able to find a Catholic priest for confessing. You want to confess to. That would be ridiculous. The Church is never ridiculous, because canon law can never be above the highest law of the Church, Canon 1725 of the New Code of Canon Law. Suprema lex ecclesia salus animarum. The highest law of the Church is the salvation of souls. It is absolutely and positively and definitely against the salvation of souls if you are forced to confess to a heretical priest, to a priest who speaks heresy in the sermons, who celebrates the Novus Ordo Missa, which is illicit and against divine law, and who gives the sacraments in the Novus Ordo, which is illicit and against divine law. You don't want to confess to this priest. So, canon law cannot be above divine law. That's absurd. And Archbishop Lefebvre knew that, and this is why he was going on. And he went on, and then he didn't get younger. So by the time it was 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre was already 83 years old. Now that's about usually the time to say goodbye to this world. Now Archbishop Lefebvre knew the moment he was dead, nobody, no bishop, not a single one, would be willing to ordain young men to be Catholic priests. What does it mean, Catholic priests? Now, rest assured, I know the situation in seminaries all over the world, diocesan seminaries, very well. I could give you an explicit description of what is going on in modern seminaries, but I can't because there's ladies present. I'm not joking. I could not possibly, in front of a present lady, tell you what is going on in new seminaries, but take an educated guess on several perversions of the Sixth Commandment. There is no way a Novus Ordo bishop, and except at the moment, 5, 6 bishops at the moment, all others are Novus Ordo bishops and are not willing to ordain a young man who refuses Vatican II, refer to my yesterday's lecture, and who refuses the Novus Ordo Missa, refer to my lecture on Friday. So you cannot become a Catholic priest if you accept Vatican II. I proved this yesterday. You cannot be a Catholic priest if you celebrate the Novus Ordo. I proved this yesterday, the day before yesterday.